In Pima County, Arizona, voters now are required to bring their birth certificates to the polls. And that's because it's a big Hispanic population. And the thinking is, well, they'll have a harder time laying their hands on their birth certificates. And there's a long history of vote suppression in Pima County. There's an essay in Loser Take All about how the vote was stolen there in 2004. Anyway, these kinds of legislation, these Jim Crow laws, represent just one way of suppressing the vote. Another is what we call voter caging. You may have heard of this. Caging voters involves sending to a list of Democratic voters at their home addresses forms that are in envelopes that look like junk mail. If you don't take the forms and fill them out and mail them in, your names are stricken from the rolls. See? And this has happened all over the country. In Michigan, the Republican Party actually targeted people who had lost their homes because of mortgage foreclosures, knowing that they wouldn't be there to get the mail. So they're disenfranchised for losing their homes. It's true. Also, Greg Palast of the BBC has reported that a whole lot of soldiers fighting in Iraq have been caged, so that these people aren't even home to get their mail. They're fighting overseas, and they end up getting disenfranchised. Okay? I mean, I'm only scratching the surface here. There's a broad range of tactics used to narrow the size of the electorate, to shrink it prior to Election Day. And this includes voter purges, which are going on throughout the nation in Democratic precincts only, at the urging of the Department of Justice, which has been carrying out these operations for several years. There's an essay on this in Loser Take All by Steve Rosenfeld. The Department of Justice has been pressuring the states to purge voters' rolls nationwide, in Democratic precincts only. And this kind of thing has consequences. That's one set of activities, okay? That's one set of activities that is involved in election theft. It's vote suppression. Now this kind of thing's been getting a lot of attention in the press, I have to say. And it's a good thing that it is, because it's something we should be talking about openly. How many of you have heard of ACORN? Okay. Now ACORN has, there's a big scandal over ACORN and the idea that the Democrats have been committing or conspiring to commit voter fraud, right? This has been the subject or the gist of an enormous propaganda drive over the last 2 weeks. We hear about it endlessly on Fox News and on Rush Limbaugh's show and on Lou Dobbs's show. And the thrust of it is that ACORN has been deliberately submitting voter registration forms that have fake names written in, fake addresses. So they say Mickey Mouse and the names of the Dallas Cowboys. You've all heard this, right? Okay, what has actually happened is that ACORN, 2 weeks ago in Las Vegas, came across a number of suspicious voter registration forms, which they come across all the time, because ACORN is basically in the business, or is devoted to advocating for housing for the poor, low-cost housing, and registering poor people to vote. That's what they do. Okay? Now, because they pay poor people to register others, a couple of bucks per form, they invariably get some forms that are bogus, because the people who are filling them out have an incentive to make a little extra money by writing Pope John Paul II or Madonna or Britney Spears or whatever it is, and saying, here you go, I've registered 30 voters, can I have my $120 please? Because there is that incentive, ACORN has been especially careful to vet the forms, because ACORN has been under very hostile scrutiny by the Republican Party for several years. In fact, after the 2004 election, there were several lawsuits filed against ACORN by Republican attorneys, and ACORN won all of them. They prevailed. They won because they could prove that they hadn't done anything wrong. Now, 2 weeks ago, Acorn submitted these suspicious voter registration forms to the Secretary of State in Nevada, who immediately turned around and said, aha, evidence that you are conspiring to commit voter fraud. And he sent the Las Vegas police into Acorn's offices. They impounded documents, and this was the kickoff to the propaganda drive that you've all heard about. Similar thing happened in Missouri, then in Ohio. Now we hear that the FBI is investigating Acorn. John McCain says at the last debate that Obama is intimately involved with the biggest voter fraud conspiracy in history, and there is literally nothing to this at all. Nothing to it whatsoever. Okay? But it has served as a huge distraction. It's a way to cloud the issue, because it's the party that's actually engaged most heavily in disenfranchisement on the grand scale that is itself charging that the Democrats are doing the same thing with Acorn's help. Okay? Now, in fact, some other things have happened simultaneously that have not received coverage. How many of you have heard of Nathan Sproul? Anyone? Okay. Nathan Sproul was the head of the Christian Coalition in Arizona in the early 90s, then became the head of the Republican Party in Arizona after the Christian Coalition merged into the Republican Party. He started a company called Sproul and Associates. And what Sproul and Associates did in the 2004 election was conduct fake voter registration drives in about 6 states nationwide. This is in the summer of 2004. They did it in Oregon, they did it in Nevada, they did it in West Virginia, they did it in Pennsylvania, they did it in New Jersey. They would go to college campuses, they would go to the Department of Motor Vehicles, they would have their employees pose as either liberal petitioners. They'd say, hi, we're collecting signatures to stop violence against women, or hi, we're collecting signatures for Ralph Nader. Or they would pose as opinion pollsters. May I have a moment of your time? They followed a script. And the goal of this enterprise was to register Republicans, not Democrats. Sometimes Democrats would get registered by ornery people working for Sproul. Those registration forms would be torn up, thrown away. And we have eyewitnesses to this effect. But most interestingly, Sproul and Associates also altered people's voter registration forms without telling them and re-registered them as Republicans in state after state after state. And the purpose of this, because it happened on the grand scale, would have been to artificially inflate the number of registered Republicans and make the disenfranchisement or the election fraud among Democrats less visible, because the toll of Democratic votes stolen would be less apparent. Now, I studied the Republican National Committee's filings. The money they paid to Sproul and Associates in 2004 was over $8 million. It was their 8th largest campaign expense. Now, Nathan Sproul's got a new company called Lincoln Strategies, and it's working for the McCain campaign. It's doing the same thing. The other day, another company called YPM, Young Political Majors, which has worked with Sproul before, the head of YPM the other day was arrested for voter fraud because he deliberately registered himself to vote in a precinct not his own. He was arrested for voter fraud, a Republican. That doesn't get any coverage. See? So what I'm saying is that our picture of what's been going on has been very badly skewed. And yet, for all that, there is still far more attention paid by the media to the issue of vote suppression than ever before. But there's another set of activities. There's another set of activities that election theft depends on. And this doesn't get much coverage at all. This gets very little attention, and it's equally dangerous. So while vote suppression is intended to shrink the pool of voters before Election Day, there's another set of activities that's far less perceptible, and that is what we call election fraud. Not voter fraud, election fraud.